I've tried to be involved in a business where I didn't get the space. I wasn't one of the people who would have used it. And I mean, that's hard from a marketing and branding sales perspective to just jump in, learn a new business and try and just apply your gut instinct to it. It didn't work. It crashed. I crashed right back out again very fast.
Hey Feasters, welcome to episode 10 of season 6 of Living the Feast. I'm Jason, aka Rez, helping you grow your business by having a conversation with someone who's been there, had success, and built a business designed around the life they want to live. That's Living the Feast. If this is your first time listening, hit that subscribe button so that you get notified every time a new episode drops. Living the Feast is in your podcast app of choice. If you've heard the show, why not go ahead and leave us a review on iTunes or drop us a comment in on Breaker or Castbox. Today's co-host is Jack McDade. Jack is the founder and creator of Statamic, a CMS that makes building a website better and easier to manage. Jack started selling services and only stopped just a few years ago when the product side of the business became sustainable on its own. You may be thinking, a CMS? Is he nuts for going into that market? And in the show, he actually agrees with you. However, as a WordPress developer myself, I can firmly say that Statamic is much better than WordPress in many respects. I'm not going to go into that here, though. In this episode, we dive into his approach and strategy on pricing for products versus services, a mistake that Jack made on pricing Statamic that highlighted the way you use a product and the way you price the product and how they need to be aligned. And we talk about pricing parity. Just in case you are the type to not finish a podcast, well, you may be interested to stick around until the end. I'm just saying. I think you're going to love this conversation about pricing, especially if you're into retro video games, tech, and being a dad. So here's Jack and I. Hey Feasters, welcome back to another episode of Living the Feast. I'm super excited to have here the creator of Statamic, Jack McDade. Welcome, Jack.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's just dive into it, right? Obviously your branding, right? Because this is what I care about, right? So I guess it's really just, you're an 80s kid, right? And fonts, the style, the colors, even the 8-bit graphics, if you will, or 16-bit graphics, if you will, of what you do. Why? Why is that your calling card?
Well, you got to have one. I mean, if you don't stand out at all, you're just part of the noise. But yeah, 80s, early 90s a little bit as far as the aesthetic goes. Once things started getting neon, and it was still fun for a while, right? Saved by the Bell and Fresh Prince. I mean, you couldn't wear. Well, I guess you could wear some of that stuff again now, just now. But I mean, I was a big nerd growing up. I've played on the Apple computers and taught myself BASIC on old machines, and just there's a simplicity to early tech that is, I mean, it's gone now, right? The way we build stuff and all our build tools and JavaScript and Node and serverless, I mean, it's complicated to keep up with it. Back then, you flip the computer on, whether it was we're playing a video game or just coding something, it was simple. You just type something and just happened, and nobody knew what was possible. It's a lot harder to imagine new tech now because there's so much. So yeah, just that era in history is just, it was all possibility and just nerdy as hell. And I love it. I love that feeling of nostalgia and that thing just being simple.
Yeah, I love it too. I mean, I go back even further than you on my branding. I go back to the 50s and even beyond that, I love that industrial kind of hey, anything's a possibility, and just that rawness. I mean, the Apollo code on GitHub. I mean, that to me, oh yeah, that's awesome. I
mean, yeah, that whole the 50s and 60s aesthetic, Mad Men and the moon race and all that stuff, it has its own even more quintessential, classical sort of feel to it. I mean, in terms of branding, if you lean into anything hard enough, there's just so much to appreciate in it and borrow from and kind of evoke the emotions in the people who are interacting with it in a way, hopefully that's intended. That's like tied to your brand somehow.
Yeah. And I find it easier once you find that, right? Like, okay, now, like I've had people say like, oh, I know that this is your post without even looking at it, like, on a social, because I know the aesthetic of it. Right. And so like, similarly to you, like the first time I saw the stamp, I was like, oh, that's cool. Like I've always like, I'm not a designer, right? Like I just don't do that stuff. And like, even in my early days, like I tried like, hey, I love the way that this interface for NBA Jam is. I wonder if I could retrofit that into a website, yes. Right? And so, like, like it was always terrible. It always looked terrible. So the first time that I saw you do something similar in that nature, at least, I was just like, and then I saw it again, and then your name kept. I was like, oh, this guy's got it. Like,
what's this guy doing?
So I commend you on it. I love it.
Yeah, thank you.
Before we get into Statamic and that product and products that come on top of that, did you do any services work beforehand?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Like we only kind of just stopped doing it fairly recently in the last like couple of years. Like I kind of started my career in the agency world doing web work for like bottom of the totem pole, doing work for giant companies like Chase Bank and, Southwest, like doing email, HTML templates, like in 2004, like that's rough work. Like I don't, you got to work your way up. Right. From there got into more like content driven stuff, like early CMS, like WordPress, Expression Engine, and then finally went out on my own about, at this point, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, did freelancing, then made a couple of false starts trying to get like a little mini agency going, like with different people. Never really found the sweet spot until I kind of anchored it off of a product. And so I started Statamic in 2012. And I mean, it wasn't a full-time gig then, but it was, some recurring revenue, and we could do some services around it and start to kind of have this like one feeds the other, feeds back into the work, feeds back into the product sort of approach and sort of build it up from there. So yeah, I mean, still love designing and building websites, helping people out. Like, I have a hard time saying no when there's something retro and 80s involved and someone wants my advice or my input or a little bit of, pixel work or something. Like, all right, I'm in. Can't help it. Yeah.
Awesome. So that was interesting that you mentioned that, like you were doing the client work and Statamic was kind of there. Was the client work essentially paying for the development of the product?
Not always directly. It sometimes like it would pay the bills so that I could, put a little bit away and not take a project and work on Statamic. Sometimes they were one and the same. Like I'd take a project and like needed a feature that Statamic didn't have and was able to kind of justify building it more or less on the clock because they needed it and they were fine with it. But yeah, I mean, I never really like robbed Peter to pay Paul. I don't think that's the way to build a business, but whenever possible, like tried to kill two birds with one stone. Absolutely. I mean, if you can do that and everybody's fine with it and you're transparent about that, there's some real wins to be had there.
Did you go get clients that you thought would be a good fit for the product? Like, so that you could essentially say, okay, look, I know what Statamic can do. I think this client would be an ideal client so that I could use that as the solution.
I mean, in the early days, no, I was just kind of happy to get anything, right? Like you just try to get work. You're like, oh, they're going to give me 10 grand. Like, this is great. We have a kid on the way or whatever. And, now, yeah, I mean, I can go after folks, or like if you try to grow the business and get more exposure, try and find someone who could be like I guess you'd call them like an influencer or someone who just has a big reach, and like see if you can get them on Statamic. Yeah, I mean, you put the logo in the footer and they talk about it a little bit. Like that stuff helps marketing, right? So like Justin Jackson's site runs on Statamic, and I helped him get that up and running. And he loves it. And he's been live streaming, building his own company site on Statamic, all of his own. That's huge for me. Like that's just free marketing, and like those sort of things. Like that doesn't scale. I can't build. If you're a big name, you get work for free or cheap. Like that's like a weird way to grow a business. Mm-hmm. But in certain phases of growth, like it definitely makes sense and it can make a big difference. So yeah.
Yeah. So we talked about the services and products, right? Mm-hmm. One of the things I think a lot of people struggle with, at least as they start building their business, and it's a couple of years in, they start to think about the product side of things. They're like, hey, I can build something that and again, I hate this term, but passively make money, which is never the case. But
it's not a real thing. No one I know actually has truly passive income. But
exactly. I like to say leveraged, right? Because it's an asset that you can sell again and again and again.
Yes.
It's a very different mindset with products than there is with services, both from marketing and sales, delivery, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
How did you adjust your mindset from one to the other?
Well, that's a really good question. I guess the approach that I took is on the product side, really just trying to speak to whoever my target audience was, like whether it was literally speak to them or write content that they're looking for, and not just, I think people tend to look at a big player in the app space, like, I don't know, like a Dropbox or Instagram or Slack or something, and just kind of do what they're doing, like whether lift their look their tone. And they're so big that they're speaking to like literally hundreds of different like audiences, right? Like if you kind of break it down into niches, you may only be able to speak to one niche, but you only need a couple hundred customers to make a living, depending on the way you've got your product price, right? So if you can speak to exactly the person you're trying to reach, like literally your homepage is the answer to the question they're Googling for, that will give you a totally different experience compared to like a really broad net where you're trying to be something to everybody. So it's okay to be like a hyper focused product. Not that every niche can work, not that every product fits into a niche, but when you can. And that's what I ended up doing is like targeting freelancers and small couple person dev shops who are just building lots of websites for people. So if I could get one person who built a dozen websites a year, that's 12 licenses that I could sell over the course of that year versus one super company that would buy one, right? Mm-hmm. And so that approach made a lot more sense, kind of going bottom up. I'm not selling to, CEOs or CTOs. I'm selling to like the guy on the bottom of the totem pole, like cranking out sites, keeping the lights on, like, oh God, I can't build another WordPress site. Like this is painful, and hey, I've got something that may be better. Take a look. And if it is, sales.
No, I mean, to your point there, I mean, so it is. It's like while the marketing and pricing, and we'll get there in a minute, but marketing, sales, and all the rest of it is different between services and products. Mm-hmm. There's still a real understanding that you have to have and knowledge that you have to have about the customer or client. Yeah, I mean that's pivotal in order to do that. It's what I talk a lot about on the show, especially guests as well. They talk about it too. Is that you have to understand the pain points. I mean, you mentioned it there, WordPress. I come from the WordPress space, but I also came from the Ruby on Rails space, Java development space. Like I looked at it as all of those tech stacks, if you will, as tools to help me build a solution for clients. And so, while Magento was a behemoth and it was a problem for a lot of people, and WooCommerce was a lot more simpler for some clients and things of that nature. So I swung that route a while. Mm-hmm. I still work very heavily in the WooCommerce space, but in and amongst itself, WordPress is not an ideal fit for a lot of people. And there are other options like Statamic and others. But I always try to fit the tech into the business and not the other way around. Right. And so to hear you say pretty much the same thing, that, hey, this is the sweet spot. This is where the product exists. And if I can help solve a problem, then there's sales. Right.
Right. Exactly. And on the flip side, I've tried to be involved in, partnering in a business where I didn't get the space. I wasn't one of the people who would have used it. And I mean, that's hard from a marketing and branding sales perspective to just jump in, learn a new business and try and just apply your gut instinct to it. It didn't work. It crashed. I crashed right back out again very fast. And so, I know who my people are, the problems I've literally been in myself. How do you manage 30 or 40 different client websites when they're all trying to get a hold of you and they're making changes in production? I'm stop. I got to turn the database off so I could get it, so I could try and work on it locally, those problems. So I built a product to solve that. And that worked for me. And I decide like I'm going to stay in my space more or less. And it's like developers, that is a big audience. There's a lot of us. And so if I can build something that helps them, great.
Jack highlights one mistake he's made, and he's going to dive into another here in a moment. But he talks about something we hear a lot from other co-hosts on the show, and that's knowing who your ideal customer is. It's really such a critical component to a sustainable and profitable business. So important that it's what the foundation of Feast is built on. Inside of Feast, you'll have access to everything you need to build your ideal client. Not solely based on demographics, but based on you, your personality, skills, and the potential market that awaits you as their go-to person. If you want worksheets, exercises, and the ability to create that ideal client effectively so that you can then go ahead and be their go-to resource and build a business that's targeted to help that specific client, head over to feastcourse.com today. As a member, you'll get the processes, the templates, not only to figure out who your ideal client is and the services that you can provide to them, you'll also learn how to figure out how to price. That's why I want to invite you to check out Feast. By using the code STATAMIC, you can get your first month for only $20. Feast is the community and resource hub for developers and designers ready to get off that project searching hamster wheel and actually run the business that you set out to build. Feast helps position you in the market with what you do, who you help, and build the processes and systems for client management, sales, marketing, delivery, and of course, pricing. Your business isn't the same as everyone else's, and it's essential for me to meet you where you are and make sure that you are getting the exact tools so that you don't get lost in the shuffle. The moment you sign up for Feast, we're going to have a chat one-on-one so that I can create a custom syllabus of resources that are within Feast to meet you where you are. If you want to stop chasing down that next project all the time so that you can start living your life, go to feastcourse.com today and use the code STATAMIC at checkout and get your first month for $20. So before we started recording we were talking and you mentioned something which intrigued me. You mentioned something about mistakes that you made in pricing. Would you mind sharing some of those?
Yeah, definitely. So the way Statamic is priced now, well, both in the beginning and now, but for a short period it wasn't this way, is a per site license. So I think... Wow, I love owning my own software. I miss the days when I could buy Photoshop and it would be in a box and a stack of CDs and it like sat there. It was like a cool looking box and it was on my desk. I'm like, yeah, that was like $600, but it's mine forever. Like there's so few software I actually own now forever. And so call me altruistic or whatever, but I think you buy the license of Statamic, you should be able to own it. And that's how I wanted to position it. So for your site, you buy a license, you can run it on that site forever. There's no like recurring, upkeep or anything like that. There's no like recurring pricing. But for a little while, we experimented with Statamic Unlimited. So we had a monthly subscription where as long as you were paying for the subscription, you could build as many sites as you wanted. You didn't have to worry about having a license for a site. And it seemed great because we now had guaranteed recurring revenue, right? So we're not waiting for someone to build a new site and then buy a license. They're just, they can build whatever they want. But what would happen is, I don't know if it was a communication problem on our side or just kind of people trying to take advantage of the way validation worked and all of that. Just people would turn it on, they would turn it off, they would turn it on, they would build a bunch of sites, they would turn it off. They would try to like circumvent it, like the way the tiers were based on the number of developers. It was like 1 to 2 developers in your company. It was, I don't know, $100 a month. And 3 to 5 developers, it was $200 a month. Like, and it scaled that way. Like, well, what if we have one developer and like one freelancer? Does the freelancer count? And so I'm answering all these questions like, what is a developer? Like, well, we don't have any developers. So is it free? Like, well, how are you going to use it? I don't know. We'll just like Google and try it ourselves. Well, you're the developer, right? So like it was over and over again, all these questions. And our revenues kept going down because some of the people who would have happily paid $200 for the license because they know it goes right back in the product. It's the only way we make money. Makes the product better. They like the product. In a $30,000 site project, like $200, you don't even notice it. Even on a $1,000 one, if it lets you build it 5 times faster than the next platform, you can build 5 times as many websites. It still makes sense, right? So that's the idea. And so those people who would have happily paid or passed the cost along were like, well, I guess this is what they want. They want the recurring revenue, so we'll sign up. And yeah, I mean, we like our revenue kind of went in half, and that was not enough to run the business. So now we're doing like projects on the side to like building sites for our customers, and then like trying to like we've already been here before. I thought we got past this, so we had to shut it down. And, we learned that the way you use the product and the way you charge for the product need to be in line. And that there was this friction point where, they were kind of incentivized to like defeat the system, and it didn't work. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I know you mentioned Justin before on his show, Build Your SaaS. Mm-hmm. Him and John talked about what metric they're defining as essentially the key metric that's going to help their customers essentially grow their podcasts, right, on Transistor.
Right.
They've been wrestling around with that pricing. It sounded like you went through something of a similar phase in the business. And so now, how does it look different?
Like, what specifically are we doing now, or how is it working out?
Yeah, both.
It's like it is a one price now. It is just $200 per site. That's it. And it's working really well. Like, we've got back all that business we lost and then some. We've doubled in the last year, and things are going really well. Could there be another way to do it better? Probably, sure. But maybe not without building yet another side of the business, right? Like, sure, we could have a hosted solution, but then you're building a hosted solution. Now we have 2 apps. There's a product and the app. And I want to be incentivized to work on the thing that we're selling. Like, I don't want to take money from this column and then move it over here, right? Pay for hosting so we can work on the product. No, I want to sell the product so I can work on the product, so I can sell the product so I can work on the product. And ideally, that would be the best way to work, right? Like, if all of the news sites, you just paid for the news, they wrote the news, you paid for the news, and they wrote you some news. Like, I feel like that they'd be better sites instead of this battle we have now with like, well, I don't want to pay for the news. So now we deal with running the gauntlet of pop-ups and everything else. Doesn't always work for your audience, but so far it is for us.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I mean, for me, to your point, I'm very much the same. Like, if I see a product, if it's a trial, whether it's free, whether it's a paid, and it's useful to me, mm-hmm. I want to know that the company that's backing that thing, if I invest in it, it's going to reinvest it back and build that product even better. Right. And so I have no problem, look, I have a podcast. This podcast, it's hosted on Transistor because I know, mm-hmm. I have a relationship with Justin. And while Libsyn or any of these other platforms out there may or may not have a better platform, Justin, I know him, and I know what he's about in his business. And so I know that they're going to put that money back in. And that for me is just, as a customer, it makes me feel better, right? It makes me feel safer too. Absolutely. I'm just going to pull the rug out from under me, and I'm going to be hanging there especially in the software game. Like, all right, is this software going to be updated anytime in this decade? Or are they doing this other stuff, right? So I get it. I appreciate that. So I saw something a long time ago, or maybe not so long, but months ago, where you talked about, and there was this conversation for a while, it seemed, on Twitter, various different various different people. And for whatever reason, it was a lot of people that I was following or having contact with, but in different columns, like nobody was crossing over. But it was about purchasing parity, like across the board.
Oh, yeah.
Right. And so can you speak a little bit more on your philosophy and your take on that?
Yeah. So, I mean, the whole idea of the purchasing parity or purchasing power parity is that you sell something in the US dollar, but that dollar doesn't go the same distance in all other countries, right? So in the Philippines, it can go a whole lot further, or the local currency doesn't match up to a dollar based on how much you work. And it's tricky, especially in the software world, because I live in New York State, which is a super expensive state to live in. I'm not in the city, but even still, it trickles upstate, trust me.
And trickles downstate too, Long Island.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. It's an expensive state to, it's to run an American company is not a cheap thing. There's a lot of paperwork and taxes, although I feel like I'd rather do that than the UK with all of the laws lately. But it's a complicated, expensive thing to do. But it's at the same time, to charge only rates that can be afforded by other people in the same situation cuts out a large chunk of the world who might be able to use your product, right? So $200, sure. I mean, it's not a big deal to like a fair amount of us in the US who are working, they charge $100 an hour, $200 an hour, $50,000 projects. Sure, great. But what about the people in like India and the Philippines and like Taiwan and Mexico and South America where, maybe rent is $100. Rent is $200. I get these emails like, this costs more than 2 months of rent. Is there anything you can do? And so you do some research and you figure out the best way to price that out. And I built a little calculator. It's based off the Big Mac index, which is done by The Economist, I believe. And it's what does a Big Mac cost around the world? Like I don't know what it is, like $4 in the US, $3.50 or something. It's like $7 in Switzerland because like our cows are really important and they're grass fed and we don't touch them. And, and then you can't get one in India. So, I mean, it's not exactly like a perfect analog, but it does work pretty well. So if you kind of run the price of your product through the calculator and it comes out the other end, like this is what it would cost them in the Philippines. What if you charged this other price and it would feel about the same? So like, what does $200 feel like when you make $8,000 a year? All right, well, maybe that's $11. If I'm fine letting them have it for $11, like I'm going to give them the discount. And, just about anybody who asks for it, I'll kind of go out of my way to like make it work for them for whatever country. It's a hard thing to automate because it's not perfect, right? And it can definitely be exploited. And how do you validate that they're from that country? And this whole thing. So right now, I just do it on a personal basis, and I just make them a coupon code, and I'll do that for as long as I possibly can until there's maybe some better way to automate that. Maybe somebody will solve that, like maybe Google. I don't know.
Or maybe not.
Maybe not. Probably not.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I commend you for that. And I respect you for doing that because a lot of people don't. A lot of companies don't. They're just like, that's the price. I can't do anything for you. I apologize for that. Likewise, I've done similar things with my coaching program where folks from the Philippines that have been interested and they've emailed me and said like, hey, I can't afford 1 hour of your coaching or your coaching program or whatever. So I, scholarship it, basically create a coupon code and figure out how it works. We'll definitely link up the calculator in the show notes, obviously. But yeah, it brings a perspective to you, especially if you're living in the US or, Europe or, somewhere where you almost take it for granted that you're going to get like a $10,000 or a 10,000 pound project and $200 is a drop in the bucket because it's just that $200 saves you 10 hours of work. You're of course going to invest in that. And so it puts things in perspective.
I think it's nice in your case, it's even trickier because you are directly trading your time for dollars, right? With a software product, if you don't ask us a question, right? If you don't take away our time or, with support questions, you didn't actually cost us anything. I mean, maybe, some server ping, some like database rows or whatever, but not a big deal. But if you ask us a lot of questions and we spend hours and hours, like for that $11 or $50 or whatever it is, you never know exactly how it's going to play out. But I think in our case, what I often try to say is like, all right, so we'll give this to you at your, PPP rate. In return, if you could help out other people in your country, like whether on the forums or in our server or in our Discord chat, we have different rooms for different languages. That's a way that they can kind of offset that effect on our time because our time is US dollars, American time, American costs, which, you got to capitalize on. If they can help each other, then we're even able to offer more of those discounts. So yeah, I mean, if there's a way to let that side of it scale on its own, that's even better.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure that they were happy to do that. Like, hey, I can answer in my language, probably better than you. You're probably in Google Translate or whatever.
That's exactly what's happening. Like, I can't tell by looking at Russian if it's spam or not. I'm like, I don't know what's going to happen. And you'll be like, oh, it's a legitimate question. Okay, fantastic.
Right.
Actually, it's a very good question. It's so bizarre sometimes what happens in this world.
Yeah. And to your point too, I mean, there's other ways in which, you have videos to support. You have knowledge base. You have Google and Stack Overflow to answer some questions and things of that nature. Yeah. While it is my time, a lot of times, I'm again of the mindset of like, hey, I'm just trying to do good and help people where I can when I couldn't get help from other people.
Absolutely.
I'll do it for as long as I possibly can. So awesome.
Same here.
So what I like to ask everybody is take a step back. What has been your defining moment in life so far?
Oh, I think definitely being a dad. I mean, business is great, but my family life is the most important thing to me. And it's probably a common answer. At least I hope it's a common answer for anyone who has kids. But even more recently, if you're anything like me, reading a lot of business books and you're trying to keep up on whatever Seth Godin and whoever else is writing, I always am applying that information to how I can make my business better. But more recently, I've been trying to reread the same content, but think about it in terms of my family and my kids. Does this information help me be a better dad? Is there anything that I can take from this about how to teach my kids better, or how to be more involved and more present and focused and debugging my family or whatever, right? And so it's been interesting. It doesn't always apply, but sometimes it does. And yeah, I mean, that moment becoming a dad has been like the biggest life change, and I love it. Like, we homeschool our kids, I work from home where I'm around all the time, and I could not imagine being away for them for more than a couple of days. I hate traveling,
right?
Even though I like the physical act of traveling, I just wish my family was with me the whole time. That's definitely been the biggest change in my life.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Likewise here. Like I have 2 kids under the age of 3. So our house is constant flux of chaos, but yeah, I mean, same with me. And it was funny too, and I don't know if this happened to you as well, but running a business when my first son was born, it was like a point at which there was this hyper focus that happened because I wanted to spend time with him, but I thought I was focused before. And I was like, all of a sudden now everything I do has to get done. I don't care about anything else. I don't get distracted, which I didn't get distracted in the first place before, but it was like
the luxury of dinking around on Twitter or Facebook or Reddit. That's not going to help my family out. That's not going to help my business out. I don't have the luxury of doing that.
Yeah.
Most of the time.
Yeah. I mean, and not to get too far off on a tangent, but similarly, I've been starting to listen to a lot of dad podcasts and reading dad books. One thing that I just there's this podcast, Front Row Dads, and it's really, the host is really about, just being intentional about being present with their kids and family and raising kids to be good adults and good contributors to society and all that other stuff. And he had a guest on, I guess it was a couple of weeks ago, about Daddy Saturdays, which is a whole YouTube channel. And I had no idea that this thing existed.
Nice.
It's all of these things, but likewise, they apply what they do in their business life to their family life and try to figure out the best foot forward. Right. And we're all trying to figure this out together.
Yeah. Yeah. We're like in an uncharted territory as a society. We've never, has there ever been this many people who work from home before that wasn't a farm, right? Besides the family farm when you had to have 14 kids because you couldn't afford to hire anybody. It's a different world. And, I was homeschooled growing up, but it was not cool then. It was very much oh, you're one of those families, oh yeah, our clothes are totally made out of the drapes, just like Sound of Music. But now it's there's almost, and I almost don't like this, there's almost this feeling wait, you don't homeschool? Do you not love your children? Which is ridiculous. And things kind of swing so far the other way sometimes. But yeah, we're just trying to do the best we can. Yeah. It's tough.
Even we asked the doctor the other day, both my wife and I, we work from home. Mm-hmm. I have a split schedule. I basically do lunchtime and all the rest of it there. And she does the morning and early afternoon or whatever. But like we're sitting in front of screens. So we're kind of like restricting his screen time. Like, he's 2.5 now.
Yeah.
There's no reason for him to sit in front of an iPad or anything like that. And even TV,
Totally.
And so, especially when we're engaging with him. So like we asked the doctor, when can we introduce a screen to him? Because we don't want to like stunt him, but like.
And they're going to have to use that screen, right? Exactly. Unless like the zombie apocalypse happens, in which case, that family member you're going to spend time with. Unless that happens, you're going to have to be proficient. And yeah, it's a tough balance.
It's a weird thing. Like I didn't have that like when I was a kid. Like it's just a different, and that's only a generation behind. Like, right. And so like, but kudos to Apple. Like whatever they did with the iOS, like the other night, like I installed new Hue lights in our living room, and it's the Hue app is nice and simple. It's it's just whatever colors you want, and you just pick the scene or whatever. He never saw it before, but yet he still knew to push up and down and for scroll. I'm like, where did you learn this?
Yep.
Like you don't have an iPad.
Yeah.
It's like instinct. It's crazy.
Yeah, you kind of take it for granted because we've been using this tech for like a decade now, right? Since like the first iPhone or whatever. But if you read their design guidelines, right, the human interface design guidelines, the HIG or whatever, they're not kidding. Like it is like humans just like intuitively know how to use it. Like you hand it to a 2-year-old, a 1-year-old, within 30 seconds, they're swiping and opening apps and closing them again. Like they're not even thinking about it.
No, it's crazy.
It was a lot harder than that to use like my uncle's Apple IIb. Like there was a couple more steps to actually getting anywhere. Yeah.
My VIC 20 that I used, the whole thing.
Oh yeah.
Keyboard, like I had the cartridges. I mean, forget it. That was not.
Yeah.
I had to type in the commands, launched Voodoo Castle, like then the game.
Oh yeah. I mean, you get the magazines in the mail and you're like typing in BASIC, like 10 space. And you're like, go to like, you're like, I'm going to type in my game so I can play this thing. Yeah. I don't even know what it is yet. Yeah. There's that exploration part of it. I kind of miss. And that's what I love. Like why I just keep coming back to like the 80s and the 90s we just didn't even know what was possible yet. And you're still figuring it out. And I hope I can find ways to have those experiences for my kids. Because if their first introduction to coding is like getting Webpack running, like, oh my God, there's no way they're going to want to do it. Like there's a couple of steps that come before that. But sometimes docs they'll lie to you. And they're like, it's super easy. Just like run this new command. Like, no, it's way harder than that.
So what's up next for you in the next 6-12 months?
Yeah, working pretty hard on Statamic version 3, which is, it's a pretty big evolutionary jump in terms of like what our platform will be capable of, and really excited about that. If you're big into Laravel, it'll be a Laravel package you can install into existing apps. So it could kind of be like a bolt-on CMS without having to run like side by side. A lot of times now you have an app, and then we also have a marketing site and a blog. And so sometimes you got like 3 different apps, like WordPress is running the blog, and you've got static stuff. Like you might be able to just blend all that right into one app, which is great. There's so many possibilities that opens up. So we're working hard on that. And other than that, literally just growing this business, seeing where it goes. Like I'm hardcore into bringing Statamic into the future, and whatever that means, like, updating the brand and getting on the conference circuit and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot to do, especially like post launch. Right now it's kind of a little heads down focused, writing the code, getting stuff done, but it's going to be a busy year for sure.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it sounds great. I mean, for me, I'm always about the tool. And as long as the tool's helpful, go check out Statamic. It's a great platform, great piece of software that's going to help you save a boatload of time. I mean, bottom line. Why reinvent the wheel?
Yeah.
And why get bogged down with a whole bunch of other stuff that you need to patch together that is all in one anyway, right? You have this here.
Yeah. So. And don't build your own CMS. Like, it's not that I'm not really afraid of competition anymore. There's so many. Just save yourself the heartache. It is a hard thing to build. It took 6 years to make it a profitable business. So if you're if you're thinking about starting a business and you're like, oh, CMS sounds easy, I mean, good luck, but try something else first, maybe. I don't know.
Yeah. I mean, and to be honest with you, and like I said, I came from the Ruby on Rails, and I used to just roll my own. like for clients, like, oh, they want to manage their website. All right, I'll just build a CMS, a quick one, right? And it just got to a point where I was like, all right, this client came back to me from 6 months ago. So, okay, well, they're all outdated at this point. And
yeah, and those home rolled CMSs, while they work for the site, they don't survive a redesign.
No,
right? And that's one of the biggest problems is that you want a CMS that can survive a redesign. Like your content, you don't want to lose your content for SEO reasons, for everything else, and the amount of work that you've put into that. Assuming you put work into that. Side note: you should put work into your content. Assuming you've done that work, you want it to survive redesigns and keep continuing on and on. And so you can just throw away your HTML and rewrite your front end layer and just pull your content back into a new site. And I mean, that should be the way we do things. We should stop throwing everything out every time. Just killing time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said, for sure.
Yeah.
So, Jack, where can folks reach out and say thanks?
Oh, yeah. I'm still kind of hopelessly addicted to Twitter. I try not to read everything. I have a lot of mute filters. I hope that's okay. Don't be offended by that. I miss the old days of Twitter. Yeah. So twitter.com/Jack McDade, or you can shout at jackmcdade.com. That's like my open email address. And you can reach me there. That's it. Those two places. That's fine. That's enough.
And statamic.com.
And statamic.com. Yeah. Check it out. Use it if you need it. If not, appreciate how much neon pink and purple there is, right?
Yeah. If you haven't already, check out his design aesthetic just from his website and all that. Like Lara Khan's website, like all of the different websites he does. I mean, if you're into 8-bit, 16-bit, and 80s video game stuff, that's your jam right there.
Yeah. Thank you.
And for anyone listening to this point in the show, which if you are, thank you for that. I know Jack, thanks you for it.
Thank you.
I would love to be able to help you and support Jack at the same time. So if you write a review on this show and screenshot the review and send it to me and mention Jack, for the first 2 people that do this, I will buy you a single site license of Statamic.
Nice.
So if this is of interest to you and you want to try it out and test it out, go ahead and do that. For the first 2 people that do that, I'll be happy to do that. So Jack, thank you for your time today. I do appreciate it. And let's stay in touch.
My pleasure. Absolutely.
And everyone out there, until next time, it's your time to live in the feast. If you enjoyed today's episode, I could speak for both Jack and myself by saying that we'd love to hear the one takeaway you got from this episode. It's super simple, actually. In the podcast app of your choice, presumably the one that you are listening to right now, drop in a comment or a review, or go ahead and share it in a tweet and tag me at Rez. And also don't forget to hit that subscribe button so that you'll be the first to listen in next week when we'll be back with more Cohen of FlixFrame. We're going to talk about how being a designer in today's market is much different than 5 or 10 years ago, and how that shift has played into the success for those that have adapted. Until then, it's your time to live in the feast.